In my opinion, NHL 2K8 is the greatest NHL video game ever made. And while you may disagree, and I welcome that, keep in mind that this video, like all my videos, is just me sharing my opinion. If you think NHL 94 is the greatest hockey game of all time, you're not wrong, and that's a fair choice. Same goes for NHL 2004, or 2K5, or even NHL 14, a game I've already made a video on, calling it the last great NHL game. Let's be honest, since EA's NHL series has moved to the 8th generation of consoles, the PS4 and the Xbox One, it simply hasn't matched the highs of that series' past. There's a reason NHL 14 is still looked at so fondly, despite the fact that NHL 22 exists now on next-gen consoles. With a sports game, if you're an offline player, you can simply update rosters for these older games and continue playing them for years. With some games like Tecmo Super Bowl as an example, people are still updating the rosters over 30 years after the original game released. Great sports games never die. Even if you've never played a 2K NHL game, picking up 2K8 today would be surprisingly fun. You may think NHL 2K8 is a weird choice for the greatest NHL game of all time. It's not commonly said. It's not as obvious as, say, 2K5 for NFL games, or 2K11 for NBA, or MVP Baseball 05 for, well, baseball. In many reviews from that era, NHL 2K7 is considered to be NHL 2K's peak. Some thought 2K8 was actually a step backwards. Others find 2K10 to be a better overall game. But here's the thing. I like 2K8 the most. In my opinion, it's the most realistic playing NHL game ever, as I feel like EA's games were always and have always leaned towards being easier to pick up and play, rather than attempting to simulate the sport as accurately as possible. 2K9 and 2K10 were also really great hockey games, but they weren't attempting to be as realistic as 2K8 was. While some may prefer those games, between the new gameplay additions 2K8 brought, the presentation, the incredibly deep franchise mode, the large number of classic teams and uniforms, the attention to detail, and more, 2K8 takes the cake for me as the greatest NHL video game of all time. Compared to modern EA NHL games, 2K8 actually has a lot going for it despite being a 15-year-old game. Breakouts are more realistic, the goalie AI is smarter, you can dump the puck high off the glass, board play is better, the franchise mode blows EA's away, in-depth stat tracking, and most importantly, it actually feels like real hockey on the ice. Back in 2007, 2K8 wasn't as graphically impressive as EA's NHL 08, and it was a less popular game that took an adjustment to learn. 2K sports games, when compared to EA's, have always felt clunkier, if that makes sense. Slower, less fluid, less fast, yet more realistic. For some people, those EA games are their preference. Look at ESPN NFL 2K5 versus Madden NFL 05. Both are fantastic games, but one plays much faster and smoother, yet less realistically. Some prefer that game, some prefer the other. With NHL games, as I pointed out in my video on the fall of NHL 2K, this is also the case. 2K8 might seem strange at first if you're used to EA's titles, but the more you play it, the more you'll come to appreciate it. 2K7 was a great step for the series, but 2K8 took a big risk, changing the gameplay controls extensively. While not as fluid as EA's skill stick they introduced in NHL 07, it's definitely inspired by it, using both joysticks to control your player and your stick. When driving to the goal, you can use the right stick to deke, you can quickly move the puck to your opposite side if a defender comes up on you, and when shooting with R1, the right stick controls where you shoot the puck. Defensively, you can use the sticks to poke check the puck away from the other team. It sounds very similar to EA's skill stick, yet the game plays completely differently. While the new controls were criticized at the time for being hard to learn, especially for those used to 2K7, once you got the hang of them, you had complete control over your players. There was little cheese in this game. You actually needed to really think and strategize to score rather than just mash buttons. With the game placing your hands on the sticks rather than the buttons, combined with much smarter AI and better physics, this was and still is the best playing hockey game ever. Some more gameplay additions included superstar modes, which only the best forwards can take advantage of by holding down the left trigger and pressing a combination of two face buttons. Your player will perform a super flashy shot attempt. The large number of possible moves and combinations is really impressive for such an old game. In older NHL 2K games, the one-timer always felt like the best shot and the most successful way to score. But in 2K8, not only could you continue using that shot, you could also hit massive slap shots that your teammates will actually redirect into the net, or you could perform wristers regularly with success. This game gave players more freedom than ever before, allowing you to play the game exactly how you'd want to, rather than following the cheese formula to try and break the game. It was obvious that this dev team put a lot of passion into gameplay, and keep in mind, this was the last 2K NHL game developed by Kush Games, a fantastic development studio. But gameplay was not the only great part of this game. The depth of 2K8 makes NHL 22 look like a joke, and the funny thing is, NHL 22 is one of EA's deepest modern sports games. You could argue that 2K8 had the deepest franchise mode ever seen in a AAA sports game. Any of them. Everything is tracked, from NHL records to single game records to career stats for every player, to deep NHL lore, to any team's history. Contract negotiations were very well done, with a meter showing their interest, counteroffers, literal negotiating with a player's agent, trying to meet them halfway. It was a game of tug-of-war that felt incredibly immersive. You need to know when to walk away, as some players will cave and agree to your terms if you threaten to do so. The new, at the time, collective bargaining agreement was fully in place, with so much detail that your average hockey fan would probably feel overwhelmed. Again, this is my favorite NHL game because it's ridiculously realistic and in-depth, not because it's an easy recommendation for anyone, but I know most viewers of my channel are really into these deeper offline modes. If there's something that an NHL GM does, you do it in this game. From restricted free agency to managing coaches, to assigning practices, to balancing line chemistry, to scouting prospects, to calling the owner. Players can leave your team for the whole playoffs randomly after a family emergency. You have to go through the waiver wire to sign players mid-season. I'm only scratching the surface here. If you love deep franchise modes and want to play arguably the deepest ever, you gotta pick up a copy of NHL 2K8 for the 360 or PS3. Presentation is another highlight for this game, with excellent ice degradation throughout the game, the Cinemotion feature returns, camera angles, replays, commentary, and more. It really felt like an NHL broadcast with authentic looking action on the ice. While some may look at NHL 2K8 as a clunkier version of 2K7, or a far too complex version of a modern EA NHL title, if you're someone who values realism in a sports game, someone who values deep offline game modes where you get to manage literally everything, or someone with a deep appreciation for the sport itself and the NHL's rich history, then you'll probably come away in agreement that nothing else tops NHL 2K8. It is, in my opinion, the greatest NHL game of all time, and nothing has come close to surpassing it since. While newer titles might have more graphics and updated rosters or more to do online, for the offline sim player, NHL 2K8 stands amongst the very best that sports video games have to offer. It was the peak, in my opinion, of NHL video games. Thanks for watching.